Recently, a man named Harold sat exactly where you are sitting now, on the other side of my desk. He was 64 years old, and on his face there was the heavy expression of someone who had just lost the silent war of life. After 40 years blindly serving the system, missing his children's birthdays, and enduring the pressure of bosses who barely knew his name, Harold confessed to me his greatest and darkest secret. He had exactly $33,000 in his bank account, and that was it. His entire life came down to this. The system promised him security. It promised that if he kept his head down and followed the rules, the future would be guaranteed. But all the system delivered was anxiety and the terrible fear of becoming a burden to his own family at the end of his life. I looked deep into the eyes of that broken man and told him the truth that no one has the courage to say. Harold, your problem wasn't the economy. It wasn't the market, and it wasn't your salary. Your problem was the tithe of your own freedom, which you simply never paid. Pay close attention to what I'm about to say now. If you feel that time is slipping through your fingers, if you are 40, 50, or 60 years old and your financial future still haunts you, do not close this video. Just listen in silence. What I taught Harold that day is not a financial miracle. It is the only ancestral law that can save your future and keep you from dying while still working. Let me tell you how the trap closed around Harold's neck, and I ask you to pay very close attention because his story, most likely, is an exact mirror of your own story. Harold was not a failed man in the eyes of society. On the contrary, he was the perfect portrait of average success, the kind that the system teaches us to applaud. He lived in a comfortable house in Ohio, had 2 cars in the garage, nice clothes, and a well-fed family. He was what everyone called a good provider. But there is a lethal poison hidden behind that provider's facade. It all started many decades ago when Harold was still a young man in his early 20s. He landed a job at a large company, put on his best tie, sat down under those white office lights, and listened to the great corporate promise. His boss at the time handed him pamphlets about retirement funds and compound interest. But Harold, like the vast majority of young men, just nodded his head while thinking about his weekend money. He took his first big paycheck and did what the system expects you to do. He spent it all: rent, bills, nights out. He told himself he was young, that he had plenty of time ahead. Investing could wait. And this is exactly where the curse of next year begins to destroy a man. Harold's later became a lifestyle. Whenever he got a raise, a new expense appeared as if by magic. His salary went up from $30,000 to $40,000, then to $60,000, and eventually he reached 6 figures. He was climbing the corporate ladder, but the percentage of his salary that he kept for himself remained exactly the same: 0. He always had a noble and rational excuse on the tip of his tongue. Next year, when I finish paying off the mortgage, I'll start investing. Next year, when the kids leave college, I'll save money. When I get promoted, there will finally be something left over. Next year always came, and Harold's hands remained completely empty. He justified this lack of financial control by saying he was being responsible with his family. He wanted to give the best to his children, the best house to his wife. But he confused being a good provider with being an obedient slave. In trying not to let anything be lacking in the present, he stole everything from his own future. I call this silent trap the golden handcuffs. The golden handcuffs work in a brilliant and cruel way. The system pays you a salary that is just good enough to keep you comfortable, numb, and afraid to take risks. But at the same time, your lack of financial planning is bad enough to keep you vulnerable and dependent on that same system for the rest of your life. You earn enough not to starve, but you spend enough never to be truly free. Harold thought he was climbing a mountain toward freedom, but in reality, he was just running on a treadmill, sweating, tiring himself out, losing his vital energy, but never moving from the same spot. He handed over his most vibrant years, his health, his patience, and his free time in exchange for a false sense of security. He trusted that the government or the company would take care of him down the road. He believed in that great lie they tell us from childhood, that you just have to work hard and be honest. And at 65 years old, a magical portal opens and you can finally rest and enjoy life. But, as Harold would soon discover in the worst possible way, life does not forgive those who postpone their own sovereignty. The reality check was about to knock on his door, and it would knock very violently. The great illusion that sustains this entire system is the blind belief in a finish line. The vast majority of men operate under an extremely comforting lie. You believe that, upon reaching the magical age of 65, the universe will issue an official memorandum. You believe that at 65 your body will forgive 40 years of stress, poor eating, and sleepless nights. You think your health will miraculously restore itself. You think the time you didn't spend with your children will magically come back, and that your family will suddenly reconnect with you just because now you have your afternoons free. But the mathematics of biology and time are merciless. You cannot compress 40 years of absence into the 20 years of exhaustion you have left. And worst of all, no one guarantees that those 20 years will actually exist. Harold's awakening to this reality did not come through a finance book or a spending spreadsheet. It came from a brutal tragedy. It came from the most terrifying sound a mature man can hear. The sound of the clock stopping permanently for someone exactly like him. Harold had a best friend at the office. His name was Thomas. They started at the company at almost the same time. They had lunch together every Tuesday. They complained about the same bosses, shared the same frustrations, and most tragically of all, shared exactly the same philosophy of life. Thomas also used to say, "Work hard now, endure the pain today, so you can travel and be free tomorrow." But for Thomas, tomorrow never came. On an ordinary afternoon, in the middle of any given week, Thomas suffered a sudden heart attack and died. He fell onto his own desk. He was 61 years old. He was just 4 years away from his long-dreamed-of finish line. Thomas died surrounded by papers, spreadsheets, and fluorescent lights, without ever having had a single afternoon of true, absolute peace in his entire adult life. On the day of the funeral, Harold sat on the church pew and began to cry. But, as he confessed to me, those were not merely tears of sadness over the loss of his friend. They were tears of deep hatred of himself. Because, as he looked at that coffin, Harold realized that he and Thomas had signed the exact same contract with life. Pay with your present, in order to maybe receive your future, and the system had simply collected Thomas's payment in advance and delivered nothing in return. That dark revelation planted a seed of panic in Harold's mind. He returned to work, but something inside him had broken. Weeks after the funeral, Harold's own body charged the price of fear. It was 3 o'clock in the morning when he woke up with sharp chest pains, shortness of breath, and a racing heart. He was rushed to a hospital emergency room. During the 8 hours he lay on that cold stretcher, holding his wife's trembling hand, Harold was absolutely certain he was going to die. He stared at the hospital ceiling and thought, "It's over. I'll be next. I'm going to die without ever having taken my wife on the trip I promised her 30 years ago. I'm going to die without leaving a legacy." In the end, the doctors said it wasn't a physical heart attack. It was a severe panic attack induced by extreme stress. It wasn't Harold's heart that was failing. It was his soul that had realized in a brutal way that it was completely bankrupt. It was on that hospital stretcher at 64 years old that Harold made the decision that would bring him to the chair in my office. He finally understood that he needed help. When Harold walked into my office, still pale from the trauma he had lived through on the hospital stretcher, he carried his bank statement in his trembling hands. He placed the paper on my desk. $33,000. That was the total value of his entire life of sweat, of absence from home, and of blind obedience. He looked at me with the desperation of a drowning man and asked me if I knew any modern financial secret, any hidden maneuver in the stock market, or some aggressive investment that could save his life at the last minute. I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands, and told him the purest and coldest truth. "Harold, I do not teach miracles. I have no magic tricks of quick wealth to sell you. What I have for you is the most severe and unforgiving law of wealth accumulation, a law that men of antiquity followed with their eyes closed to build empires, but which your generation of blind consumers has decided to ignore." I revealed to him what the ancient sages and the patriarchs of the oldest money on earth had known for thousands of years: the golden rule of personal sovereignty, the unbreakable law of paying yourself first. Pay close attention to the brutal simplicity of this rule. 20% of everything that passes through your hands does not belong to your present. It belongs solely and exclusively to your future. Most people react to this with defensive indignation. Harold reacted that way too. He said to me, "But Rabbi, the cost of living is sky high. I can barely pay my bills at the end of the month. How do you expect me to take 20% off the top before I even pay my rent or my food?" It was then that I revealed to him the true meaning of his mistake. I said, "Harold, think about what you do on the very day you receive your paycheck. The first thing you do is pay the bank that financed your house. So, you work the whole month for the banker. Then you pay the electric bill. So, you worked for the power company. Next, you go to the supermarket. And there, you work for the owner of that store chain. You hand your sweat over to the owner of the gas station, to your credit card company, to the school, to the restaurant where you have dinner on the weekend. You distribute your vital time to all of them. And what is left at the end? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. When you spend 100% of what you earn to sustain your current standard of living, you are not just making a financial mistake, like a simple math error. you are committing a very deep spiritual and moral mistake. By distributing all your money to others and not keeping the first and best part for yourself, you are declaring a terrible message to the universe and to your own mind. You are saying, I am the least important person in this transaction. My future doesn't matter. My peace of mind doesn't matter. The banker deserves my money. The government deserves my money, but my own future self deserves absolutely nothing. This is a bankruptcy of your own identity as a man. It is the total loss of your sovereignty. I looked into the eyes of that 64-year-old man and gave him a very clear order. From this day forward, you will pay yourself first, 20%. That amount is sacred. It is the absolute price of your freedom. You will take that money the very moment it lands in your account, and you will hide it from yourself. Harold was terrified, but he knew that the pain of discipline was the only alternative to the pain of poverty in old age. On that day, he finally stopped asking for shortcuts and accepted the weight of responsibility. His war for freedom had begun. When Harold walked out of my office that day, he knew he no longer had the luxury of time. He was 64 years old. He no longer had 3 or 4 decades to watch compound interest do the heavy lifting slowly and lazily. He had to run a sprint, and he had to do it without making a single mistake. The first thing Harold did was face his $33,000 not as the end of the line, but as his initial seed. He used his 40 years of experience in the corporate market and began taking on consulting jobs and short-term projects. He didn't go back to the 8 to 6 office routine, but he kept an active source of income. And that is when the brutal transformation happened. For the first time in his life, Harold followed the golden rule. He automated 20% of everything he earned. Before the money even touched his hands, before he could come up with an excuse to buy something or pay a less urgent bill, the 20% went straight into a separate account. The money simply disappeared from his line of sight. To make up for it, he started living on the remaining 80%. And let me tell you, it was not glamorous. Harold had to swallow his own ego. He cut the cable television. He canceled the vacation trips. He started driving the same car that was over 10 years old, and he began fixing things inside his own house instead of hiring people to do the work. He stopped trying to impress neighbors and friends who, deep down, never cared about him. And what did he do with those sacred 20%? He didn't try to be the smartest person in the room. He didn't buy virtual coins. He didn't invest in miracle businesses. He didn't try to guess what the next big technological invention would be. He did exactly what the oldest and safest money in the world does. He sent the money to the most boring, basic, and predictable place in the financial market. He bought slices of the 500 largest companies in the United States through a low-cost index fund, the famous S&P 500, month after month, rain or shine, with the market booming or with the market in crisis. Harold didn't read the news. He didn't panic. He just sent the money. He was buying small pieces of the gears of the American economy and letting the machine work for him while he slept. In the beginning, his friends said he was crazy. They said a man his age should be in risk-free investments, that he shouldn't put his money in stocks. But Harold remembered my words. The greatest risk of all is reaching 70 years old, depending on the charity of others, just to be able to eat. So he kept going. Cold, silent discipline. 3 years went by. Harold turned 67 years old. He was already officially retired by the government, but now his hair was whiter and his posture was much straighter. My office phone rang. It was him. The voice on the other end of the line was no longer choked with tears nor dominated by desperation and shame. It was the voice of a man who had reclaimed his own dignity. He told me that he no longer had only $33,000. That disciplined and stubborn man had just crossed the mark of $1,100,000. He had become a millionaire, not because he won the lottery, not because he had a genius idea, but because for 36 months he applied the severe mathematics of discipline, and the market simply did what it always does over time. It grew. Time, which had once been Harold's greatest enemy, had finally become his greatest employee. Today, Harold is a truly free man. He no longer has to bow his head to any boss. He can travel with his wife, he can watch his grandchildren grow up without rushing, and he can sit on the porch of his house on any given afternoon, simply breathing without having to calculate the financial return of every second of his day. The oppressive anxiety that almost killed him on that hospital stretcher has simply vanished. But there is one detail about this story, a dark detail that few people have the courage to admit. Despite the more than $1 million in his bank account, Harold carries a deep regret, a ghost that haunts him in the sleepless early hours of the morning, and that ghost has a name, Thomas. Harold knows, and the merciless mathematics proves it, that if he had had the discipline to pay himself first when he was 30 years old, if he had set aside that 20% from his very first paycheck as a young adult, he would not have just $1 million. He would have surpassed the mark of $5 million. He could have retired at 55 years old. He wouldn't have missed his children's games and school presentations. He wouldn't have sacrificed his own body and his own mind to the stress of a corporation. And, most painful of all, he could have spent more quality time with Thomas before his friend's heart stopped beating beneath those fluorescent lights. Harold paid a very high price for taking so long to wake up. True wealth is not for buying sports cars, gold watches, or designer clothes. True wealth is for buying your presence. It is for buying the right to be by the side of those you love when they need you the most. Money, when handled with discipline, is the only tool capable of buying your absolute sovereignty over your own time. Perhaps you're watching this video right now and thinking, "But Rabbi, I'm already 40, 50, maybe 60 years old. It's too late for me." Pay close attention to what I'm about to tell you. It is never too late to do what is right. If you are 35, you still have 30 whole years for compound interest to work in your favor. If you are 50, you have at least 15 years of explosive power in your hands. And if you are 64, exactly as Harold was, you still have enough breath to avoid ruin and build a wall of protection around yourself. The price of not following the sacred rule of paying yourself first is not just having an empty bank balance. The true price is trading the most vibrant and energetic years of your life for a future that may simply never arrive. At the beginning of this conversation of ours, I said that I did not want your subscription and that I did not want your like. I ordered you to simply listen. But if you have made it to this exact moment in the video, your mind is different. You do not have the weak mentality of the great masses who flee before the first uncomfortable truth. You have the patience and the discipline of the ancients. Therefore, if you are ready to abandon the illusions of this sick system and learn the severe mathematics of money, of reading people, and of power, subscribe to this channel right now. Become part of a restricted circle of mature minds who choose clarity over comfort. And I want to test your commitment. I want to know who truly had the honor and the resilience to stay until the very last second. Go to the comment section right now and write only the following sentence: I choose my freedom. Do not write anything else. Just, I choose my freedom. Let these words be the first official contract you sign with your own future. Your next paycheck is coming in just a few days. What are you going to do with it? The slavery of the present or the sovereignty of tomorrow? The decision and all of its consequences now lie entirely in your hands.